listening to Sable Radio.
So hello, welcome to Eat Your Greens for a Sable broadcast, launched their new website, and I'm Queenie Wells, and this is my show Deep End, which I usually have on Sable, but it's live streamed today, which is pretty fun. And I'm joined by two guests, Marai Larasi and Warman, if they'd like to introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm LA Warman. I'm living in New York City. I use she, her pronouns. I am a poet, erotica author, as well as teacher through a school that I founded called Warman School.
Brilliant, thank you. And Marai, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, so my name is Marai Larasi. I normally live in London, but I'm hanging out in Jamaica. COVID-19 has done this thing of turning the world upside down. So I'm here where my parents were born. I use pronouns she, her, and them, which is Jamaican. So, and it's really great to be here, Queenie. Thanks for inviting us to be in this conversation.
Thanks so much for joining me, the both of you. I'm really excited. So I guess I'm going to get straight into it now I've introduced the films and themes and just ask, what were both your initial thoughts on the films?
Initially, I was really excited.
Sorry, guys.
I was really excited to see them paired together, and just the way you presented them of thinking about the sea. It was really exciting to see the way they challenged each other, and thinking too about whiteness was kind of a way I watched them, and thinking about how like the white gaze changed the Claire Denise, I'm bad at names, but Claire Denise movie. Just thinking, because I watched that one second, so I was thinking about how like the white gaze kind of altered how that movie was created, and thinking about colonialism, and I was really struck by the different portrayals of the sea and desire. So I'm really excited to talk about everything.
Yeah, and Marai?
Yeah. So for me, as you know, I had download problems. I'm in the mountains, so I was able to watch Atlantics, but not. I wasn't able to watch Beau Travail, so I kind of just had to read stuff and watch kind of trailers. I love Atlantics. So for me, just the whole, it's transgressive in so many ways. Like there's so many elements of that film where I was just like, oh my God, you did that. You know, it's just like everything from the use of, so the way that she uses the sea to kind of the spirit possession aspect of it, the kind of the way that she plays with gender, the way that she plays with this whole thing of the police officer and the significance of kind of law and order and respectability, and just like it's a really beautiful and painful film. The whole thing of and you know, like LA said, the thing about colonization, like I really saw that in that film, like the Atlantic Ocean as a place where so many of my ancestors perished, and but also so it's a site that many of us revisit emotionally and psychically all the time. And because there's so much ancestral memory there because of the pain, but there's also the resistance, the way that resistance and transgression has emerged within that. And I really saw a lot of that in this film. So I'm going to shut up now because, like, I've been dying to talk to someone about this film. I'm like...
No, I'm so glad you both enjoyed the films. They're really exciting. Like, I was definitely taken with both the films visually. Like, I absolutely love it, and I'm definitely like drawn to images of the sea anyway, because I just think it's beautiful. And the way these films interact with that body of water just like blew me away. But what blew me away more is that I just couldn't find anything on it anywhere. I've done so much bloody Google searching and JSTOR and everywhere, and couldn't find anything. So I'm glad you guys both connected with it in that way and got what I was getting from it to a degree. So I guess that brings me on to like my next question, which is like, what stuck out most to you from the films? Like, Marai, you started talking about bits and stuff. Do you want to start off with like the thing that really, I don't know, any standout moments from Atlantics?
Yeah, so first of all, the visuals, and I'm not like a film buff, right? But I guess you'd call it the cinematography, was just absolutely amazing. So the visuals, like I've been to Dakar, so I was just like, the way that she uses the ocean all the way through the film, right? As and that whole thing around migration and the ocean as escape. But and again, I guess people shouldn't listen to this because I can't do it without giving, there's going to be spoilers. But that whole thing around the sea then claiming these young men who are resisting, who have been resisting, but who are now escaping with the hope for something better. But then, like them dying in the ocean, but then the transgression of like they're dead, but they're not dead, right? And like the fact that she was just like, okay, we're going to move across, which is so present in a lot of African spirituality. We're going to move across physical death, and we're going to transgress that realm, and we're going to have men inhabit female bodies. And we're going to have like the person who's seen as the kind of slightly troublemaker dude inhabit the body of the police officer. I was just like, she's put so much into that. Like, it's so queer in the sense of, queer as transgressive, that, and the fact that Mariama, like the character who's attempting to be the well-behaved girl is one of the bodies that is possessed, right? I was just like, oh my God, Matty, you just went in. Like she just like did all of these things, right? Like right through the film. So those are just a few things. Like it's a deeply painful, poignant, but beautiful. Like, it's such a film of resistance, and Ada's resistance all the way through and her defiance is just beautiful as a central character. So, yeah, just love it. Love it.
Yeah, no, thank you. And LA, would you like to share?
Queenie, you've gone a bit softer. I don't know if it's because you took the headphone off, but I'm not. Oh, yeah, you're okay now.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Cheers.
Yeah, that's I really love what Marai just said, especially thinking about there were times in which the ocean itself looked like a ghost, and it was almost like watching the liveness of ancestors and like seeing how they still can act and impact the present was a really beautiful moment. And then thinking too about water, and I was noticing the moments when Ada was with Omar, it felt like the water was trying to be controlled. Like thinking about that pool, that really pristine, like flat pool, and the ways in which Omar and like money was trying to just flatten everything, but it couldn't be flattened because of these ancestral forces were just too strong. And also, like what Marai said, the images were just so beautiful. Like even the bed after it was on fire, I didn't want that image to be like my phone background. It was just like so many stunning images. And then thinking too about fire and the role of fire and water. And fire was always a sort of threat that was lingering, like fire to the tower. And then also thinking too about Earth, because there was that moment when they were describing being in the boat when they were about to die and saying they thought they saw a mountain and thinking that you saw land. Yeah. But what they thought was a mountain was a wave. So I was thinking too about like mutability and how everything kind of became water at a certain point. And then like sunrise and sunset being the same thing. Oh, and one of the moments that stood out to me too is the role of mirrors and the idea that one's spirit or like soul could only be seen in this mirror. Maybe that is like a question I have. I would love to hear what you all are thinking about that too. But those are just things that stood out to me.
I really like the use of mirrors, I guess because it also got to like showcase that club that we'd spent a lot of time in earlier and things, which we'd never actually seen inhabited by like the boys as well as the girls. We've only ever seen the girls in it, so it's quite nice to see them together, even if it's only through this mirror. But yeah, I don't know if I have much to say about the mirror, but I'm glad you noticed it because it also stuck out for me as something that I couldn't quite work out, apart from, I guess, about like reflections and like the ways in which we see ourselves and others see ourselves. But even then it didn't quite fit. But I don't know, I guess I still liked it for the actual setting and making this sort of club, which is on the outskirts of where they're all living. And is obviously like a fairly secret place that all these girls and guys can hang out together away from their parents, who all seem to be like pretty overbearing and restrictive. And most of the girls that go there seem to be without parents or something. It's fairly unclear, but I thought it was like a fun use of the space for it to be in that club. And that's where like they're all united, or like at least can be. But yeah, no, I'm just really glad you guys both like the films, to be fair, because I was a bit nervous because it's always like, you never know what people are into. But yeah.
Can I say something about the mirrors, Queenie? Can I just add something really quickly? See, so like for me, the mirrors were just like a continuation of the water. Like that's how I was reading it. So I was like, this is just more water that's kind of a lot more static. Do you know what I mean? So I was like, this is that thing of coming, like rising from the water, like, you know, the guys rising from the ocean, and where the different ways that they made themselves visible, like making themselves visible through the bodies of the young woman, but also making themselves visible like in the mirror. Like for me, it was just like, all connected. So I was just like the mirrors of the ocean, like in a different way. That's kind of what happened for me. But like I might have been going a bit deep with it. Who knows? You know, like
definitely.
I'm gonna watch this film like 3-4 times. Mine, yes, yeah, 100%.
No, I think that like makes complete sense, because that's the fun about mirror. Well, the sea acts as a mirror, and water always acts as this like reflective surface that's sort of transient or something. So seeing, oh, that's really nice actually. Something I did want to mention and wondered if you guys picked up is like, one thing I loved in the club was the way the lights moved. I thought they moved like waves, and in general the editing of both films are so indebted to like waves and currents and so on, which I thought was exciting. And I just wanted to share a quote with you guys, which is from a review of Beau Travail, but I think it could easily be from Atlantic's, well, about Atlantic's as well, which is this is not a film about narrative, but about image, sound and rhythm, and the ways in which they create understanding beyond storytelling. And I thought both of those films really capture this, like, they're like visual poems. They're really, if you're looking for like a straight narrative, you're going to be really unsatisfied, because it's about everything else they're doing and how together they create this thing that's so visceral. But yeah, I love the lights, because I just thought they constantly moved like waves over all of them all the time. And it was just this beautiful thing of like, even when we don't have shots of the Atlantic Sea, we constantly know there's waves and there's this motion constantly going on. And it's this, really visceral, sensual filmmaking, I thought.
Yeah.
And going off what you were saying, thinking about the club, because I was really struck by the contrast between the club scenes in the two different movies. Where in Beau Travail, it felt like the club was a place that sent where these men, and like generally like white men, could have pleasure in ways that felt like, I don't know, it felt almost like they became the center of the club and their experiences were centered. But then in Atlantic's, it was, the club was totally different, where the club was where these people could really just be and exist almost like apart from these gaze, like the gaze of the parents or like the authority figures, or like Omar, or the idea of marriage. So it was just so interesting that the clubs serve almost like opposite roles in the film. And then too about like the end of Beau Travail, where there's like the club scene where he dances by himself, and that's like where he seems like the most bodily and the most like in himself. And it's like, wow, so he can, the only times he's really like in himself is like through the club, which seems to be through him, through his like white desire too. So it was just, I just really noticed like that contrast in like the way the club is used.
definitely. Well, I guess that's like why I was drawn to sort of pair the films together, was this sort of like, they feel like opposites or like two sides of the same coin sort of storytelling, where they're using the same visual motifs and editing to tell very different stories, but also, I don't know, because it's hard to articulate, because yeah, the clubs represent such different things, but they're still got the same root, I guess, which is really fascinating. And I know you haven't seen Beau Travail, Marai, but the last scene of the film is just the main character dancing in the club, and he's really acrobatic, and it's absolutely like bizarre ending to the film, and it's really beautiful. I've watched that scene so many times because it's so nice. But yeah, they're strange films, and I think what drew me to pair them together and stuff, and wanted you guys to view them together as well, was this idea that they're both tragedies, but on total different types of tragedies. Where with Beau Travail, it's just sad. The entire film is just like about people restricting themselves and not letting go at any point of what's restricted them, while Atlantic's embraces that sort of like restriction and that idea of like abject desire or whatever, and that's what sets Ada free the most. I don't know what you guys think about that, but
I think because I haven't seen the other film, it's hard in terms of a comparison.
Yeah.
But there is something for me about her absolute refusal to submit to the respectability that is being forced on her, and Suleiman reaching out to her from the bottom of the ocean to be like, I've got you. And so like the way that it ends with her kind of her declaration of independence, a bit like June Jordan's declaration of independence. It's like, I'm going to do my thing. Yeah. It's her kind, like it closing in that way. Not like her life is going to be like absolutely perfect or any of those things, but she has centered herself through the space of her desire for the person who is her beloved, and who is her beloved, irrespective of whether his body, you know, like even that thing where they like, you know, like the sex scene towards the end, you know, where it's Issa's body, right? But she is making love with Suleiman, right? And for her, that liberating act of, you know, resisting the kind of attachment to virginity, you know, like resisting like all of these things, and doing that with one body, but with somebody who, for all intents and purposes, is meant to be dead. It's like ultimately like, you know, like I'm done. Like I'm doing what feels right for me, because this is about my liberation. And so like there's something so beautiful and joyful and sad, because it's really sad. Like you want to make love to your beloved, you want to have sex with your beloved or whoever, like in the body that you knew them in, right? But like in the way, and the fact that took place in the club also for me was really significant, because again, the club is the extension of the ocean in another way, and a kind of this space of resistance. So yeah, a lot happened for me in terms of what embodiment is supposed to be, and how we understand life, and how we understand death. And but also our narratives around queerness that often feel like very geopolitical North Western centric narratives around queerness. And this film is so queer in so many different ways, even though it might not be explicitly queer for so many folk.
Yeah.
By the way, the rain is coming down, so you might have background noise of heavy rain.
That's absolutely
like water.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah. No, thank you. No, yeah, it is just such a striking, beautiful film, really. And I've definitely got to give it a few more watches, because at first I was quite confused. I was just like, huh? what's happened here? Or like, I was quite irked by Suleiman coming back as the police officer, but you mentioned that felt really queer to you, Marai. Do you mind like expanding on that? Because I'm really intrigued.
Because I think the police officer is young, is the rising star, represents control, law and order, respectability, decency, a certain type of progression. And so for it to be his body that is inhabited is immediately disrupted. It's like Suleiman's disrupted something by actually having this be the body that is performing the burning of the bed, that is performing all of those things, like in a weird way, like in the Western imagination that we've all been so trained in. Of course, it would be like, yeah, wouldn't it be great if it was one of the women's bodies, and that would do something different, right? But actually, there was something so powerful that it's just like, it's Mr. Law and Order, who burns the bed. Like it's him that becomes ill, and he experiences his own freedom when he says the case is solved and he walks out. So he's also been freed from that restriction by virtue of being inhabited by Suleiman. Suleiman's given him a space of freedom that he might not have otherwise known if he had stayed in the police force as it was constructed. So I love that. I love it. I was just like, who else to... Can I swear?
Yeah, no, you can swear.
Am I allowed? Oh, okay, because I swear a lot. I've got to put in my mouth. So I'm like, who else to fuck things up apart from like the body of a, like, do you know? Like, that's where you want to go. You want to go to the thing that represents the state and the status quo.
Yeah.
And you want to have that thing perform, you know, the kind of the trouble. You want to have that thing be disruptive. So that's why I loved it. I was just like, go Issa.
No, definitely.
Yeah.
But yeah. Well, this brings me on to some other questions I wanted to ask you, which is going off the films a bit and stuff. But I just wanted to ask you both how you both interact with water in your work, perhaps, and like, did these films resonate at all with how you've interacted with the theme or bodies of water before at all?
I can go ahead. Water feels so essential. I write a lot of erotica, so wetness is something I am obsessed with. But then also there's the additional force of water feeling almost animal in the ways that we're connected to it, where being around water, it's at once a form of protection, but then also a form of violence. If we think of, as Marai was talking about, the history of like the Atlantic and other places of violence. So I'm always thinking about water. And then also I teach classes. I'm a death doula, so I'm always thinking about water in that context too. And I teach death courses where I make people go to a body of water and just like look at it for as long as they possibly can. And there's something about that that just kind of connects us to all these different times at once, connects us to the past and the future and our own bodies. So I feel the water is just so important to me, like as a person, and like floating in water is my ideal feeling. And then also when we think about the erotic, we can't not think of like wetness as a space of desire, and desire as like a sort of power that we have.
Yeah. No, totally. I love water. That's why I've done the show. So, but I'm glad, you interact with it like that and stuff. So how did you think about like desire with Atlantics in particular? Because I was initially thrown off by the mixture of like, there is so much grieving and loss in the water, obviously in Atlantics, much more so than Beau Travail, which to me felt like just straight up like desire in Beau Travail. Like the water there felt for me like everything he couldn't have was always in the water, especially because that film's really from his very singular perspective. And then when you sort of realise that, you're like, why is he remembering all these shots of the men in the water when he wasn't even with them and stuff, and how it's so occupying his memory at all times. And it really took me back and started me on this like sort of idea. And then when I came across Atlantics, which Bailey had like shown me, like was really like excited for it, because I had been struggling to find a lot of water in films for a while that like I could access at least, and then saw this. But it's so full of like grief, but it's intertwined with more, and I don't know, it makes it even more of a like haunting, ghostly image throughout the film.
Yeah, I think erotics and death are close friends. And when we think of grief, I think that is always in the space when we think of erotics. And the idea of loss is always there, because without loss, I don't think desire can really exist, because then we understand the temporality of desire. And then thinking too in Atlantics, it was really like we could not see beyond the sea. The sea is like the limits. And in that way, the limit is infinite, because the sea goes forever. And thinking too about when the sea was shown after Ada and Suleiman kissed for the first time, it was really just like a sort of, there's like a waves and like choppiness to it. And that felt a lot like desire and a lot like love. So I think the ways in which the sea was shown alone was really powerful in an erotic way in Atlantics, because it wasn't showing like this fantasy. It was showing more of like the reality of the desire, and thinking of choppiness, and also like the mist that was happening a lot. Sometimes the sea was almost totally covered in mist when it was shown alone. So thinking too about the limits of sight and how that can also like create a desire too. So I guess there's just like so many different forms in which Atlantics, the sea, represented a sort of desire beyond fantasy that could incorporate things that are beyond the body, which feels really important.
No, definitely. Marai, I know you have something to say about this. I also wanted to ask him, you added a quote to the Google Doc I'd made for us all. If you have it to access, if you'd like to read it out, or I can read it out, because I think it was really beautiful.
Yeah, it's quite a long one.
Yeah.
But yeah, but there's I guess there is a bit in it where she, before I actually touch on the quote, can I say a couple of things?
No, go, please.
I think just because I don't want to lose what LA just was saying about beyond the fantasy, because I think we're often schooled through kind of multiple messages to think about desire and the erotic in a very clean, quote unquote, ecstatic way that doesn't involve the everyday crap that we're dealing with. And I think one of the things that Atlantics does is it feels like a much more truthful account, certainly for me, of as quote unquote a post-colonial subject, certainly a more truthful account of how I have to occupy my body and move through space, and how desire is constructed and reconstructed all the time, despite the levels of harm that exist historically and the levels of harms that continue to be meted out on people like me, as, you know, Black, as queer, you know, and so forth. Despite those levels of harm, there is resistance, and there's also desire, right? And so I live with the ghosts, and that's one of the things I appreciate about Atlantics. Like it calls the ghosts in to inhabit the space in a lot more honestly, right? And and I think Matty Diop herself said something, because she speaks about the Atlantic Ocean. She says the Atlantic Ocean is a very haunted place for the global Black community, from the West Indies and the United States to Africa. It's a very charged place, And that's why I put an S to the title of my film, Atlantics, because it was a way to talk about actual migration, but also to touch on other ghost stories through the story of that crossing. The ocean is both political and mythical. And I think that's it for me. And in the political and the mythical, there is the desire, there is the erotic, there is reconfiguring and new narratives around how we do sex, how we do desire, and so forth. And so that's one of the things that felt really truthful about this film. Like, so it didn't, in many ways, it didn't, like, as someone who's Black, queer, woman loving, so forth, it's not like I saw myself in the film in that immediate representation, like that mirror, but I saw myself in the film. Like I saw myself in Ada, I saw myself in Suleiman, I even saw myself in Issa, right? As you know, how we engage with respectability and tidiness and all of those things, and then we become haunted through ancestor or otherwise, and that then reshapes how we live in our body, right? And how we do loving, how we do sex, how we do all of those things. And so, yeah, like there is for me, I know that I'm probably going to watch the film like several more times, because I found it a real gift personally in terms of my own, like it deepened something for me around, I felt seen in that film, if that makes sense. And that's a part of that question about like how we use water in our work, like in my poetry and, you know, kind of even in activist spaces, I refer to the Atlantic Ocean constantly, like it's a place of recall for me. But there's also the way that I live in my own body, the way that I use water, the fact that, you know, like showering is a ritual for me, like the cleansing that I do before I do particular rituals, you know, and as, you know, LA says, like, we can't talk about the erotic without talking about wetness. We can't talk about, you know, and there's a way that we're terrified of that as well. We're terrified of, you know, like we sometimes become anxious around drowning in what that represents. You know, there's also, because I'm still an old school dyke, there's also films from like the 1980s where the female orgasm was often represented with the crashing of waves. Do you know what I mean? It's like two women getting to bed and then you don't want to show anything. And so what you see is the ocean and waves crashing. And so there's also like a part of me which thinks we sometimes end up using water to speak the unspeakable, right? Mm-hmm. So, and I appreciate that as well as struggle with it. Yeah. Did you want me to say something about the Omoseke's quote, or do you can drop that in?
I don't know, whatever's easiest for us. Like, I can, if you want to, Marai. Just because I think it was a really lovely quote and could be like an interesting way we can take the rest of this conversation instead, until I just sort of list off all the times water has been used for a female orgasm in a film, because now you've said it is used all the time. And I guess that's what's sort of fun about this idea, is that while we're sort of used to water being a stand-in, especially for like female sexuality in particular, I think what's fun about these two films, and Atlantics in particular, is how it does that, but does so much more, and the ocean becomes so vast and unknown, and it takes in all of the multitudes of like the erotic experience. It's not just like, oh, we can't show this, we're going to show that. Instead, it's used as a shorthand for so many other things, which is really exciting, and I haven't seen anywhere else, and got me really excited. But for now, do you want to read out some of that quote? Because I just think it'd be really lovely to share.
Sure. So there's an awesome book by Omiseke Natasha Tinsley called Ezeli's Mirrors, and it's looking at kind of reimagining Black queer identities. And in that section, they speak about being in the belly of the slave ship, and what was formed in the belly of the slave ship in the place of pain, and the whole thing about, you know, sex segregated space and beautification. And so there's a section that says, and even as they beautified each other in the belly of the ship, women loving each other in those sex segregated slave holes was also part of how they survived and remade themselves in the Atlantic crossing. Wecker strongly argues that the present day Suriname, which is, Surinamese term mati, which Creole women use to mean my mate, my girl, my same-sex lover or partner, derives from the African diasporic concept of the shipmate, and from words the enslaved used to refer to those who survived the Middle Passage with them. Hair sculptures, a work of beautification and erotic touch, where the mati work, she suggests, were intertwined ways that women rescripted what their commodified bodies were supposed to mean. Lay down, body, lay down, little while. And for me, that is just, it's poetry, it's a meditation. But when, you know, I saw Dior doing Ada's hair, I was just like, yeah, of course, of course. The ritualistic beautification, you know, just before she has like that final encounter with Suleiman, you know, Suleiman itself.
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing that, because it does make that scene even nicer. It's already a lovely scene, but it's just fun having this context of being like, yeah, it all does link together, obviously, but it's nice to have a direct thing to interlink with it. But yeah, I'll see if I've got any more questions for you guys, unless there's anything in particular you want to share about the film still that we haven't touched upon. So I've already asked you how you relate to water in your own work, but I did want to ask, do you think water is a motif of queerness and desire in particular, which we have sort of touched on, because I sort of was drawn to these films with this idea of like water does feel like the most natural like imagery for it, because it is this like huge unknown, it is transient, it is the ultimate liminal space, and it's nice that these films take advantage of that and stuff. But I just wanted to hear what you guys thought about that.
I can say something. It perhaps is answering this question at a big angle, but I was really into what Marai was talking about and thinking about water and the way water can haunt. And I was thinking about the Beau Travail as the sort of haunted film, which excited me because that seems to be a way to fight against like white colonialism, like thinking of the main character as being haunted by these water, by the water. And there's this scene where there's the helicopter that crashes into the water and there's death. And then there's that scene where they're swimming with the knives. And so it's like they are trying to control the water. They're trying to be like, this water is mine, but then the water is fighting back against them and killing them and haunting them. So I think that's a really powerful way in which white supremacy can be fought, is like through the haunting. So that's something I was thinking of. That's kind of a swerve from the question, but I think that is powerful. Like for me as like a white person thinking about the white gaze and the Atlantic's kind of speaking to Beau Travail, that is like what's really exciting is like that white water space. White people are like haunted by this, and that feels really important and necessary. And then thinking your question, queer desire water, is that the question?
Yeah, if you do think there is like a sort of intrinsic link between these two things.
I think so. I mean, water, if we think about it in the most basic sense, it's, you can't hold it in your hand. It's always moving. It's always like changing form. And that feels like queer desire for me. And it's queer desire beyond like these gazes too that we're talking about, because it is always like changing, slippery. And I think slipping through these different forms and not being able to be grasped or even seen, like when we think about the mirrors too. And that feels super important when I think of queerness and desire. I suppose that is my answer.
No, definitely. I would most certainly agree with that. And Marai?
Yeah, I think probably as it's probably one of the ones that's easiest for us to draw on in terms of symbology. Like people use fire in different ways and breath in different ways, but there is something about the very nature of water, and even the fear that we feel around water, because water is also inscripted with violence, right? Which we saw in the film. Like we saw water taking life away, and so much of queer life and queer identity, queer resistance, queer, kind of erotic performance carries this edge of that duality, of the liberation and the fear of being swallowed up, the fear of the violence, so it's, like, to be queer, to exist as to be queer is to be transgressive. To be transgressive is to be at risk of harm. And so it's not just water in a lovely, fluffy, kind of nice way. It's also water in the way that feels risky. And so I think water does feel like a connecting symbol, but also, and there's also the thing around bodies, right? And like when you share water, like when like people think about touch very often as in skin on skin, but water creates a different kind of touch. And so much of of our queer identities involve that aspect of, especially when desire is being policed so rigorously. And so where water might be the space where there is sharing, where there is contact, even when there isn't physical contact. So the fluidity of the water allowing for that. There's also a constant anxiety, if you're like me, about the contaminating effect of water, and so there is also something around how we where that fits in terms of our own respectability. And like we're always grappling with our own respectability, I believe. And so also where water fits in that. So yeah, like for me, water is just ever present as a motif, in terms of queer desire. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, guys, for sharing your thoughts first. We're going to have to wrap up now, as it is nearing the end of the hour. But yeah, thank you so much for both coming on and discussing this with me. It's been really, really lovely chatting. I've really enjoyed it, and it's been fascinating, and it's been nice to discuss this with people because, yeah, I've been banging on about water and queerness and things to anyone and everyone I know for like the last 2 years. So it's been really nice to finally have an outlet for it and hear what you guys had to say and echo things I'd thought, and also give me so many more things to think about. So yeah, thanks so much. It's been really exciting. I'll have you back anytime if you'll have us. And yeah.
Thank you.
100%. Thank you.
No worries.
Take care. And LA, good to meet you. Take care.
Good to meet you.